From the Digital Media Center, on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. This is an educational support program for intermediate English learners who want to reach higher levels of English proficiency. This is episode 109. We take a content-based approach and we use thematic content to help you reach your goals. Today's episode focuses on Native American groups who were pushed onto the Great Plains from east of the Mississippi River. Let's watch this video, The Great Plains. Stretching from Canada south into Texas, between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi's woodlands, the Great Plains dominate much of North America. These vast grasslands have their own unique ecosystems, carrying countless herds of bison, commonly known as buffalo. Through their grazing and migrations, bison shaped the Great Plains biome for thousands of years. Bison seem to define the Great Plains, bison and the people who revered and depended on them. When horses came to America, people of the Great Plains mastered them to thrive here. The horse changed everything. Some Native Americans gave up farming for a nomadic life, following the great herds, hunting, trading, and raiding. Freedom and power were their rewards. The Great Plains were more than just grasslands. There was a stunning amount of diversity in this region. Those who lived here came to know it best. Dominated by prairie, the Great Plains proved resilient to the horse culture, remaining in balance with new animals and with new people who moved onto the plains to take advantage of all they have to offer. In 1804, the year that Lewis and Clark departed St. Louis with the Corps of Discovery, another event at St. Louis would have consequences for the Sauk people and lead to yet another slaughter of unarmed women and children. Military Governor William Henry Harrison held council with the Sauk, the Fox, and other tribes living east of the Mississippi River. The resulting treaty was a terrible deal for Native Americans. Leaders gave up thousands of square miles of homeland for a pittance. Historians ask if the leaders really knew what they were signing. Most just wanted to be left in peace. The Treaty of St. Louis allowed the tribes to continue using the ceded land until it was sold to American colonists by the U.S. government. That would take 20 years. The following year, far west of St. Louis, the Nez Perce Indians were discussing what to do about the white people who appeared out of the Sawtooth Mountains on emaciated horses. The Nez Perce spanned two distinct ecosystems and cultures on the Columbia Plateau. To the west, they fished for salmon and lamprey seals. To the east, they pursued bison from the horses they obtained and bred. Tribal members lived busy lives, hunting, fishing, and gathering on the seasonal rounds. They put away stores of meat, berries, and roots they gathered for winter. What the Nez Perce did not do was farm. It was not in their culture to do so. The Nez Perce were not the first to obtain the horse. Tribes closest to the Spaniards captured horses long before. The movement of horses onto the Great Plains went from south to north, with the Nez Perce being fairly new to them. But the horse quickly became central to the identity of the Nez Perce. They learned to master riding as well as selective breeding, adding the Appaloosa horse. It must have pained them to see the poor state of the horses carrying the core of discovery. The Nez Perce creation story was very tied to the land where they lived. A giant monster had to be killed and its parts flung throughout the world. The heart of the monster can be seen here. While skeptical of the core of discovery at first sight, the Nez Perce took in the strangers, feeding the hungry explorers and helping them recover from near starvation. Lewis and Clark left the party's horses with the Nez Perce as they learned more about the Columbia River from them. The Nez Perce showed them how to make a dugout canoe and helped them resume their journey toward the Pacific Ocean. Like the Chinook Indians to the west, the Nez Perce formed bonds of friendship with Lewis and Clark. They welcomed them back on their return journey, having cared for their horses over the winter months. While waiting for snow to melt in the mountain pass, Lewis and Clark spent several weeks with the Nez Perce. This is where the bond of friendship grew even stronger. Some Nez Perce suffered great emotional pain to see their new friends leave when the snow melted. The Nez Perce vowed never to go to war with the United States, and soon a small party of Nez Perce would travel to St. Louis to seek the book that held such powerful medicine for their new friends. Meanwhile, they continued to flourish in the land they loved. When the English colonies in North America declared independence, Spanish colonies took notice. By 1800, Spain controlled the most territory in America, stretching from the Louisiana Territory south to the tip of South America, except for Brazil and some small claims by other European powers. Mixed marriages between Europeans and Native Americans produced the fastest growing segment of the Mexican population, the mestizo. A whole class of Mexicans developed from those born in America with only Spanish blood, known as the criollos. This well-educated and cultured group could only rise so high in America, as the top positions were held by those born in Spain, the peninsulares. Resentment of these conditions came to a head in 1810 when Father Miguel Hidalgo summoned the people in Dolores and began Mexico's independence movement. Gathering mestizo and Native Americans from Celaya, Irapuato, and other towns, Hidalgo approached Guanajuato, the heart of Mexico's silver mines. This is where the first battle of independence was fought, in a building called the Alhóndiga. Hidalgo was horrified by the number of peninsulares who were killed in the battle in this building. But he knew that there was no turning back for him or the other people dedicated to winning independence from Spain, and that is the beginning of the country that we call Mexico. The war dragged on for 12 years. Hidalgo and other leaders were arrested, killed, and their heads were chopped off. Those heads hung from the corner of the Alhóndiga in iron cages. Some of the iron can still be seen on the building. In 1821, Mexico was independent from Spain, setting off independence movements throughout Latin America. 200 years later, Mexicans celebrate independence, like these young people in Pátzcuaro. The year 1821 was met with wild celebration in Mexico. The city of Guanajuato is known to this day as the cradle of Mexican independence. In Argentina, the Congress of Tucumán declared independence from Spain. In the American Southwest, travelers from the United States found themselves welcomed by Mexican officials. Trade began between Santa Fe and St. Louis, hence establishing the Santa Fe Trail. Passage across Indian land was met with small acts of resistance, but the trade went on. The emergence of Mexico did not stop the slave raids by New Mexicans, nor the response by Native American victims. Within a few years of Mexican independence, settlers from the United States began arriving in the Mexican territory of Texas, setting up farms on Native American land. In 1824, the North American fur trade changed. Trappers from the United States appeared on the Great Plains and in the Rocky Mountains. While the fur trade continued to include Native Americans, Euro-Americans also did their own trapping. They met every year at the rendezvous to trade their pelts for items of value and whiskey. The first of these was on the Green River. In the mountainous regions of Utah and Colorado lived the Utes. The Utes felt very much at home in the mountains. The Utes lived in this area from time immemorial. They saw numerous tribes come and go along their borders. They had friendly relations with the Pueblo, the Paiutes, and the Western Shoshone. The Utes were early adopters of the horse. This improved their hunting success and changed their warfare from defensive to more aggressive actions. They sent out hunting parties to the Spirit Lake area, where they might encounter trespassing and poaching by Cheyenne, Shoshone, and Paiute hunting parties. This often resulted in a fight. The Utes traveled between other tribes as traders. Ute artistry was greatly admired, as it is today. Their beadwork often included symbols of a bear, a central figure in their spiritual practice. The turtle harkens back to the Ute creation story. Ceremonial objects include rattles filled with quartz chips, making the rattle glow in the dark when shaken. The Utes are also known for their distinctive pipes, shorter than those of their neighbors. The Utes were comprised of 7 bands. They traveled through the Rocky Mountains and beyond to hunt and to trade. They were valued as traders, especially for their soft leather work. Even the Spaniards valued trade with the Utes. The removal of Native Americans from their homelands east of the Mississippi River affected more than just those groups. Historian and writer Christopher Havman explains how this removal affected Native Americans on the Great Plains.
These Indians being forced or, coerced west are moving here, and they're settling on land of other Indians who were forced to give up their land. So these Indians are now intruders on other Indians' land. So when you think about removal, there's 2 sets of victims here. There are Indians from the east who are now displacing Indians in the west. And in this case, the Indians that are being displaced are the Osages. And in 1825, the Osage Indians are coerced into a treaty to give up a big swath of Arkansas and Oklahoma, and they're forced up here into northern Oklahoma and parts of Kansas, all right? And the Osage don't like it. And the Osage will raid the Creek Indians. They'll steal their horses and they'll steal their livestock. And why are they doing this? They're doing this because they see the Creek Indians as intruders on their land, right? So removal just has a lot of layers of victims.
The Osage people had dominated part of the Great Plains since they were pushed out of the Ohio Valley by the Iroquois. By the early 19th century, the Osage had become the dominant power in the region, feared by neighboring tribes. The tribe controlled the area between the Missouri and Red Rivers, the Ozarks to the east, and the foothills of the Wichita Mountains to the south. They depended on nomadic buffalo hunting and agriculture. The Osage saw all things around them having the spirit of Wakanda, the Creator. Animals were here to teach the Osage how to live. In these vast grasslands, the Osage lived among the mule deer, cougars, and elk. They revered the wolf and admired its courage. Their conflicts were not with nature, rather with other groups of people. Having effective warriors was seen as essential to their survival. While Osage women grew corn, squash, and beans, Osage men rode on to the Great Plains to hunt buffalo on horses they obtained by trade from the French and raids on neighbors. Their villages were also involved in the Great Plains trading network. The Osage had traded with the French and were allied with them in struggles against the Spanish. French Jesuit missionaries described the Osage as tall and fierce. As the Choctaw and the Cherokee moved into the West, they were attacked by the Osage as trespassers. The Cherokee suffered early defeats, but later prevailed at the Battle of Claremont Mound with help from allies. The United States built Fort Smith to discourage further fighting. There were more battles as displaced tribes and settlers entered Osage territory. The United States responded by arming other Native Americans and encouraging them to attack the Osage. The Osage eventually signed a treaty with the United States, under which it gave up land for promises that were largely broken. The Osage were not the only people forced to move west as a result of European colonizers. As displaced tribes were forced to move west, residents of the plains were forced to resist and often to move. The Sioux were forced to move by the Iroquois as they captured hunting grounds. They participated in the French fur trade and were allies of the French, despite being enemies of other French allies, especially the Ojibwa. Wisconsin and Minnesota became the territory of the Sioux, where some communities farmed and hunted. The Sioux believed that Great Spirit was in all things, and that following kinship rules was the most important endeavor. The Sioux were known as the Seven Council Fires, as 7 distinct bands shared language, culture, and values. When the Sioux obtained the horse, the importance of hunting and warfare increased, as did their material well-being. Language and culture united the 7 main Sioux groups. French traders learned that only by establishing kinship ties could they carry on business. Outsiders could also be adopted by Sioux communities through ceremonies. In 1805, the Sioux signed their first treaty with the United States. They gave up 100,000 acres of land. The United States got to build Fort Snelling, and the Sioux had better access to trade goods. A treaty in 1830 gave up lands along the Des Moines River. The Lakota Sioux adapted to life on the Great Plains with their acquisition of horses. Many became skilled riders and buffalo hunters. Boys learned the skills of horsemanship and war starting at a young age. A mounted warrior society emerged. The Sioux now ranged throughout the northern Great Plains and some mountain areas. Near the Yellowstone River, fur traders discovered South Pass in Wyoming in 1812. South Pass was a gentle cut through the Continental Divide. This discovery would soon have a major impact on Native Americans on the Great Plains and far beyond. In 1830, a party of Nez Perce traveled to St. Louis to request the book that held the white man's medicine. the Bible. This launched a movement to send missionaries to the Pacific Northwest. By 1836, 2 missions were established among the Nez Perce and their neighbors, the Cayuse. Crossing the Great Plains, the missionaries proved that an overland passage from the United States to Oregon country was possible. The Sauk people had not always lived in Sacanook on the Rock River, but they made this country their home. When they lived further east, the Sauk had traded with the French and had good relations with them. But when the Fox were decimated by the French, the Sauk took them in. And this ended the good relations with the French, and the Sauk had to move west. The Sauk raised crops here as they had always done, but now they left Sacanook in the winter to hunt on the Great Plains. The Sauk continued this life even after agreeing to give up their land to the United States in the 1804 Treaty of St. Louis. 20 years had passed since that treaty, and now settlers arrived. Keokuk was a trusted member of the Sauks at Sacanook, and he had fought against the United States during the War of 1812. But he had seen the teeming cities in the east and urged his people to move west. Resistance, he reasoned, was futile and deadly. About 800 Sauks saw things differently, and they were soon led by a war chief named Black Hawk, who had also fought the United States in the War of 1812. Black Hawk was 60 years old. Black Hawk recruited warriors from the Fox and Kickapoo. They were known as the British Band. Even with 1,000 Potawatomi warriors added, Black Hawk agreed to take his people west of the Mississippi River. The winter of 1831 was especially harsh, and corrupt Indian agents loyal to President Jackson caused widespread hunger and exposure. In 1831, Black Hawk led a group of Sauk warriors, women, and children back into Illinois. The presence of women, children, and the elderly indicated the band was not a war party. This fact didn't calm nervous white settlers. The army and volunteers were pressing to stop Black Hawk. Black Hawk sent messengers to the militia under a white flag of truce. The messengers were shot dead. Black Hawk responded with an attack on soldiers under command of Major Stillman, killing a dozen soldiers and routing the much larger army. This became known as the Battle of Stillman's Run. Prior to this, Black Hawk had not been committed to war against the United States, but now both sides determined to fight. Black Hawk began raiding settlers, while Potawatomi Chief Shabona, who opposed war with the U.S. Army, rode through the countryside warning the white settlers. Whites and Indians fled to the small town of Chicago, swelling its population. Numerous battles ensued with casualties on both sides. Warriors of the British band killed and mutilated the bodies of settlers, including women and children. As his people started dying of hunger, Black Hawk decided to lead them back across the Mississippi River. This decision did not end pursuit by the U.S. Army and local militia. In crossing the Wisconsin River, Black Hawk engaged the militia in rearguard attack that resulted in the deaths of 68 of his people and the success of women and children in crossing the river. This was known as the Battle of Wisconsin Heights. Black Hawk made several attempts to tell the army and militia that his people were returning to the west, but it appears that the whites had no intention of letting them escape. At the Battle of Bad Axe, Sauk warriors tried to fend off army attack while non-combatants swam across the Mississippi River. The steamboat warrior gunned down those non-combatants as they reached some islands. At least 260 of Black Hawk's people died that day, including many women and children who drowned trying to cross the river. The Battle of Bad Axe would soon be remembered as a massacre. Those who escaped from the Battle of Bad Axe were hunted down by Menominee, Dakota, and Ho-Chunk warriors, with approval by the Army. Of those who followed Black Hawk across the Mississippi River into Illinois, at least half were now dead. Under Keokukh's leadership, the Sauk ceded 6 million acres to the United States and remained in Iowa until their land was sold there in 1842. Most remaining Sauk moved to a reservation in Kansas. The Black Hawk War marked the last resistance to the United States east of the Mississippi River. But the expansion of the United States didn't stop there, and neither did the violence that came with that expansion. With that, we close episode 109. Join me next time for Ramping Up Your English. Thanks for watching. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.